This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell, and I, as usual, am super excited about today's episode, probably more excited about today than others for reasons that will become apparent soon. But we've got an awesome guest for you today. We have Angela Cheng-Cimini, who is the CHRO of Harvard Business Publishing. You might have heard of them. They publish the HBR, which basically has given me 3/4 of my good ideas over the course of my career. Angela's held a range of really exciting people leadership roles, most recently at ClearMotion and Crabtree and Evelyn. Angela's a regular podcast guest and a speaker on everything from employee experience to emotional intelligence and the role of HR more generally. Angela and I met over some very stale bagels and awful coffee at an HR conference in Boston and ended up having such an interesting conversation that we decided to record our next one. And I think today is going to be a dangerous episode indeed, especially for conciseness. We're diving into something that I care a lot about, and I know Angela does as well, which is the often underrated importance of recruitment and talent acquisition in business. Angela, welcome to the show.
Oh, Felix, what an introduction. It's my privilege to be here. Thank you so much.
And I'm really sorry that we couldn't provide any awful coffee for you today.
Oh, yes, I was really excited. It was the highlight of what was going to be this very special moment.
Absolutely.
Next time.
Well, let's start a really high level question then. When you go into an organization or for the sort of businesses that you've worked in previously, how do you think about talent acquisition and recruitment? What role do you think it plays?
Well, as you and I talked when we met the first time, my belief is that talent acquisition is the start for many good decisions to follow. If you don't have the right people who are aligned to the work that you believe in, your mission, your values, then everything becomes so much harder. It is not a decision that can't be undone, right? Worst case scenario, you part ways. Slightly better case scenario is that you fumble around and you get recalibrated. But best case is you have someone who hits the ground running and is additive to your organization. So for hiring managers who see it as just, HR housekeeping, I have to go through all these resumes, we really need to find a way to flip that script for them to see that it is one of the most important business strategic decisions they can ever make.
Yes. And I think one of the interesting concepts there is, I think one of the things I find fascinating about recruitment is that it's really obvious when it's not working. And it's really obvious when it's working really well. And I think what kills a lot of companies is when it's kind of all right and they're bringing in people that just about hit the bar, but it's sort of more of the same. And I think that a lot of companies sort of struggle to get their hands around what makes a really good recruit into the organization. So what would be your advice for an organization that wants to take those first steps of really upping their game when it comes to talent acquisition?
The first step is to understand what the business needs. What are the objectives? Why do you exist? Why are you here? Then identify the DNA of the people that have proven to be successful. What makes them really good? And then try to bottle that up so that you can articulate that. And then thirdly, think about the skills and capabilities you need. Right? So if the organization understands why it exists, if it understands what kinds of people it takes to make it thrive, then the other stuff falls in place. Because it's easy to write the job description. It's much harder to do the first two. And I think that's the part of the work that a lot of organizations just sort of gloss over. They say, oh, I've got a job description. Now let's go find some. And they haven't done the homework of the first two steps.
And is that, do you think, why a lot of new hires would have thrived where they're leaving and then maybe struggle in the organization that they're joining, that the company that they're joining hasn't done enough research into what makes a great instant impact hire, for example?
Yes, I think that is exactly right, Felix. Yes.
That all sounds really simple. what are the key what would you say in your experience are those key elements of magic that makes someone work at company A and not at company B? What are the, and I know we talk about culture, for example, but what are the sort of buckets of things that we should be testing for to see if people will be a really successful hire here?
So recently I weighed in on a LinkedIn post where someone was railing against the interview process and how it's really hasn't changed very much even with technology until very recently. And one of the suggestions that I made that got some traction on this post was that I think we should give the interview questions ahead of time. Not only does it make the process so much more inclusive because then everybody is on a level playing field and it appeals to those people who aren't naturally extroverted or maybe can't think on the fly. It much more closely matches what the work will be like once they arrive. Nobody only ever gets one shot to do the work spontaneously, right? We always have a chance to read the material, to consider it, to go do some homework, to go do some research, talk to people, and come forward at some later time with the best possible solution. And then there's always an opportunity to iterate. So I don't know why we cling to that process where we think that people have to nail it on the first go. And so I think it is always good to give people a chance to show up as their best selves. So to the degree that the interview process gives candidates and hiring managers that level of clarity, what is the work really like? How do we make decisions? What are pain points in organizations? And how much freedom can someone have to be creative, to problem solve, and to think differently? I think those are the things that unlock what makes an employee really, really do well.
Yes. It's one of these things that I if you look at the interview process and sort of, I guess, the classic interview structure that people put in place, if you were approaching this from first principles and you were thinking, all right, well, I need to hire a new, I don't know, data, like head of our data insight team, I would actually guess for that role that you probably rank the most important elements as, well, first of all, I want someone that can tell really effective stories with data and pull data. I think the sort of interpersonal element would be important and a must-have, but it would probably rank towards the lowest of the must-have priorities. So if you were building an assessment process purely against what you're looking to hire again for, I'd say maybe you'd have one interview and then the rest would all be, study at home, give them the data set, ask them to provide some insights off the back of it. And I agree with you. There's something, and I do see this in the recruitment world a lot, of a sort of, well, this has always worked for us historically. Why would we change it? And I'd love to get your perspective on, why do you think it is that we hold some of these established ways of working so closely and often guard them? I often see sort of hiring managers or even HR professionals guard them so aggressively. What do you think's behind that?
I think it's something that I spoke to a little bit earlier, is that it is difficult sometimes to get hiring managers to take the process seriously. So we're just happy that they show up, and we're happy that they've spent more than 5 minutes right before the interview having prepared, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of it is, thank you for showing up, and so we take what we can get. And anytime you're upending a process, it's a whole change management thing. And it takes time, and there's friction, and there's tension. But it is something that we've tried to do here. We've designed an interview question builder. We've done training with our managers. We've really tried to take a look at the whole landscape to understand what it is we're trying to solve for with the hire, right? We've really treated it as a business problem, not just a hole to be filled. And so to that, I think everybody wants to come and get the best answer. And that best answer happens to come in the form of a candidate. But I do think that a lot of it is just inertia and friction in the system that makes us reticent to upend the process, because it's something that we're familiar with and it's easy to do. And boy, at least we get through it.
It's really funny what you said around, we're happy that they showed up to the interview. There's definitely I can certainly relate to that feeling from my days of recruiting as well.
That's right.
How do you win that hearts and minds battle then with your hiring manager community?
First and foremost, anybody who's in talent acquisition has to demonstrate that they are there to solve the same problem. It's not just, I'm not an order taker, right? I'm really here to solve a problem for you. And I need to understand your business. I need to understand your objectives. And I need to also help you maybe see the world a little bit broadly. So just because you have this role and because maybe it's a replacement for someone, this is an opportunity for us to rethink it. And maybe at the end of the analysis, it's exactly what you thought you needed, but maybe it's not. And maybe you can think differently around capabilities. Maybe it's an opportunity to redesign the team. And so our job is actually much broader than, as I said, an order taker. It really is an opportunity for us to think about talent strategy, maybe even org design, and to do an assessment of all the other bits of capabilities that already exist and how this person can complement or supplement or add. So we like to take it up a level, a notch in that conversation. And when you can demonstrate that you're really in it for them, the partnership goes so much further.
Yeah, and I really like the way that you framed the new hire as a business. The recruitment process is, how do we solve this business problem? So instead of just saying, okay, well, you lost Tim, let's hire Jane to fill Tim's position, you can say, okay, well, Tim's been with us for 10 years. What's changed in that period? What has tech done?
Yes.
What does the business look like? What are you looking to achieve in 2-3 years' time that you don't have the skills for in your organization? And taking that consultative approach, I can see how that really changes the conversation for the hiring manager. I imagine sometimes you and your team probably got I wasn't expecting that from the meeting.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And those aha moments are so special, because then you're on the right track to eventually getting the right hire.
So let's talk aha moments. I think that's really interesting, and we are I think recording at a time when there is some shift in the certainly the discourse in the US and in the UK around diversity of organizations and in the role of businesses to build, I guess, actively a more diverse workforce. And I think in the work that we do at Instant Impact, helping to bring in a new diverse talent pool is really important. It's top of mind for a lot of what we do. But I wonder if we could talk a little bit about recruitment's role in helping businesses to build in a more to bring in a more diverse population of people to work for an organization, because it feels to me that that's one of the really big sort of strategic value drivers that TA functions can bring. How do you look at that?
Absolutely. It is a subject that I'm constantly talking about with my head of TA, and we're really trying to expand the definition of what diversity looks like. So even when I submitted my name for this role, I looked nothing like my predecessor, and I looked nothing like what someone might have been conventionally qualified for, right? I didn't come from media. I hadn't worked in higher education before. But what I brought was 30 years of HR experience that I could prove was transferable. And so I think anytime that you can sit down and have that conversation with your hiring team to say, let's imagine what the largest fishing pool could look like. And how do we then extend our brand so that it is appealing to people who might not otherwise have considered applying? And then, of course, the other side is the sourcing. So then we go out and we tap people on the shoulder and say, yeah, you might not have considered us, but here's the hook. This is why this could be super interesting for your next step in your career. Whether it's we think the mission aligns with the work that we've seen you do, or you have a particular expertise that we need. It is definitely a push and pull, but I do think that it is incumbent upon TA to help the organization reconsider what the ideal candidate looks like, because we know that hiring managers typically will look for what they're comfortable, look for what they know, and they may not have the network that is as diverse as the organization needs it to be. So we have to really help them push the boundaries of that envelope so that they can consider candidates they might not have otherwise.
I obviously completely agree with you. I think from how far can we push that though? I mean, just taking you're a publishing organization. Presumably there are roles in the business that do require direct industry experience to do. So how do you encourage your team to be cognizant of, I suppose you have to hold two truths in your mind at the same time. One is that we are the experts in recruiting and in bringing in new talent, and two, that the hiring manager is the expert in their field. So at what point do you think we have to defer to the hiring manager saying, actually, you know what, I really do need this person with this experience for X, Y, and Z reason? Where do we stop pushing and start I suppose, deferring to someone else's knowledge?
We push until the very end. When we get down to the choice of the two finalists, we almost always have someone that's got a slight edge, or maybe they each have an edge, but for different reasons. And then we say, okay, we've laid it out for you, but our job is to make the choice really difficult, right? I mean, if it's a runaway because there's no one else in the funnel, then I don't think we've done enough mining for the right candidate. I'm not looking to inflict pain on our hiring managers, but I do want it to be a difficult choice. I want them to say, gosh, both of these are really tremendous. And then they go back to why they had the position open in the first place. And maybe that's the tiebreaker for them. I do want to say, Felix, that I think that there is always a danger of overextending, which is making ourselves too much the expert in helping others build diverse teams, because then you might unintentionally relieve the hiring manager of having to also do that themselves. Right? I want them to have a diverse team because they understand the value of that, not just because my team is constantly forcing it down their throat. That's also not good, right? So it does really need to be a journey of a conversation for folks to understand why this is good for them, it's good for their team, and it's good for the business. And I'm fortunate that by and large, most of the managers I work with already understand that, but I have certainly worked in other contexts where it's been more of a campaign than I would have liked. And I always have to be careful that I don't go too far, because then they say, well, fine, then it's all on you. And whether or not you source someone, or whether you present someone, or whether I make the final, like, they give me the complete responsibility, and that's not really where it should lie yet.
Well, not least because then if the hire doesn't work out, they can put the accountability on you and your team rather than...
That's right.
Fascinating. I think one of the key areas that I've always loved to grapple with is on being able to measure the quality of hire in an organization, or the quality of employee in an organization, so that you're able to track your TA functions' real impact on the organization. I wonder if have you put any metrics in place in organizations that you've worked at where you're able to say, okay, well, how good are we today, and how are we able to increase that quality of talent in the organization over time?
That's a really good question, Felix, and I appreciate you taking me to task, because I will honestly answer and say no, that we don't have any formal mechanisms beyond 30, 60, 90-day check-in to see whether or not the candidate that we've identified is a successful. Certainly anecdotally, we know where we've gone wrong and where we've failed, and I think to some degree we put it on the candidate to say, well, it was a good hire based on what they presented, but boy, all this other stuff came out of the woodwork that we couldn't possibly have probed for. So we do try to do more after action reviews, because so when a hiring decision goes wrong, we want to go back and we want to sort of do an autopsy and like, okay, what did we miss the first time around so we don't make that mistake the second time? So I think we do that sort of at an atomized level, but we don't do it sort of holistically across the system to really understand what good looks like. And that is sort of the next level of sophistication. I think generally because we have low attrition, our hires are typically quite good. So we haven't had a forcing function to make us do more of that reflection, but it is really good practice to test the system to make sure that it is empirically doing what you need it to do. So I'll put that on my list, Felix, of things I need to go after.
Well, if it helps, I don't think I've seen any company do that really, really well. There are some good measures that you can put in place and we're actually working on the reason I ask is we're working on a bit of a measure for it at the moment, some proprietary insights that we can provide our clients with. But I thought if I could steal some Angela knowledge as part of that, I wasn't going to miss this opportunity to do it. No, so I think one of the things I'd be really interested in picking your brains on. I know you've been in the people in HR space for I think most of your career. How have you seen recruitment change over that time? I'm obviously not talking about sources of candidates and things like that, but maybe the way that businesses think about recruitment.
I do think that it now carries a higher level of strategic value than it did in the past. And I've seen that sort of across all levels, all types of jobs. So when I was with Crabtree and Evelyn and we were talking about part-time sales associates, we were actively trying to go out and get the very best, even at a time when, boy, it was the mirror test, right? Are they breathing? Like you hold it under their noses, and if the mirror steams up, then you know that they were good enough to hire, right? We really were trying to get away from just any warm body that was walking through the door, because that's where so much of the business happens, right? And the retail associate is the face of your brand. They are what drives revenue and sales at the first point of contact. So if you do that poorly, the knock-on effect, as you can imagine, is tremendous. And so I think certainly there's been a shift to understand that at all levels of the organization, it's not just at the CEO, that we need to take care, that we need to make sure that the people who are doing the interviewing are skilled. I think there's been a lot more investment in making sure that hiring managers know how to do it well. And that can be difficult because sometimes they can go an entire year and never have to ever interview anybody because they just don't have vacancies. Or maybe they do it once every 3. And it is a skill, it's a muscle that needs to be practiced at home just like any other. And again, if you believe that it is truly an important function, then you've got to be really good at it. So what are the things that HR can provide to make sure that hiring managers, when they step into that role, are as prepared and as honed for that job as they would be for anything that they do day to day?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of these things that people just sort of sleepwalk into, isn't it? You know, I'm going to do an interview, and you end up talking about, I don't know, people you know in common. Oh, it's my bugbear, is when there's an interview that's all about people you've known in common at previous companies, never gets into the actual interview itself. It's bias all over the place. I think one of the things that is really challenging, even for recruiting professionals who are thinking about this day in, day out, who might do, I don't know, 7-8 interviews a day, it feels to me like some of the things that we may traditionally have interviewed for to test how well someone's going to do in the role going forwards, particularly I'm thinking about their sort of subject matter knowledge or their hard skills. It feels like with the rise of AI, some of that has become, or is increasingly becoming, actually quite fungible and less important in the individual. In a world where maybe some of that information is more readily available through, you know, your large language models, through the internet, through your co-pilot at work, what do you think are the things that we should be testing for to see how to hire people that will thrive in this new environment?
Yeah, I think that observation is spot on. Certainly that's something they've been saying, right, is that our need to hold the knowledge resident is less and less important when everybody has even just a simple search through Google. Never mind Gen AI and what it can produce for you through the LLM, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that I no longer have to know because I can just Google it. I think it does put me in a disadvantage because now it means I'm also more ignorant. But back to your point, right? We now say the technical skills perhaps are less important because there's so many other ways to get at the information, and because the speed at which technology is changing, that you can't really expect people to know everything they need to know because it will look completely different in a year anyhow. So that points to someone's capacity to learn, their intellectual curiosity, their ability to collaborate and work with others, their ability to manage ambiguity, lots of change or no change, their resilience, their grit. So all the what we call soft skills, and I'm actually trying to introduce the term power skills, because I think that that's the match made in heaven. It's your technical skills with your power skills, because that's really what amplifies and elevates your ability to do all the technical, the job on the job stuff, because it's much harder to teach grit. It's much harder to teach resilience than it is to teach someone how to code. So I do think that is becoming much more important. Yeah, power skills.
That's so good. I love that. That feels it feels like exactly what they are, which are the secret weapons, your hidden superpowers as a human employee, rather than soft skills, which doesn't fill you with excitement, does it?
No, it doesn't. And there's a connotation there of vulnerability and weakness, which, um, you want people who have a degree of confidence and certainty. So yeah, I like power skills.
So I mean, if there's any form of yeah, just count me in on the campaign for power skills. I'm a, I'm a big supporter already.
I think too is that a lot of times what we fail to do in interviews is we take one example and we're good with that. So if I go back to the retail associate and I'm testing them for their customer service skills and their ability to understand what the customer's needs are, give me one example of when you did an amazing customer service recovery. Great. Now give me 5 more. Because over the course of an 8-hour day, they're going to have to do that 100 times, not just once. And oh, by the way, the candidate has a canned story in their back pocket ready to pull out. They can tell you 1. They can probably tell you 2 or 3. But boy, they're going to have to, if they have to dig deep to give 9 or 10, then maybe they're not as good at customer service as you think they are. So I also think that we need to probe deeper than we have.
Yeah, and the thing that I really enjoy doing is providing, and it takes much more time to prep it as the hiring manager, but providing some form of scenario that they can demonstrate rather than tell, show. And I think often that's, if you have a combination of telling and showing, that's where you get a really powerful blended interview for these sorts of power skills, which are easy to bluff, especially in the US. It's really interesting. I know you know this, but I love the fact that so many European companies come over to the US and then end up hiring customer service or sales professionals who are unbelievably good in their interview and then fail wholeheartedly when it comes to joining the organization because we're not used to people bluffing.
True enough.
Well, we've only got time for one more question, sadly. I can't believe how quickly this has gone. But I wonder, looking forward at the next five years, gosh, it almost feels impossible to think that far in the future these days. But 5 years, how do you think the world of TA and recruiting will evolve? What do you think the key differences will be between then and today?
I believe that humans will always be part of the process, although I do think that there will be a commonplace adoption of AI as an important tool for testing, for assessing, for vetting candidates. I'm not quite sure what form that looks like, but there's so much discussion around the bias and discrimination inherent right now in a lot of those AI tools that they have to solve for that for it to get real traction. And I think there are organizations that are hard at work at that. And so eventually it will become a tool just like anything else. But I always believe that there will be a place for humans to make that contact because you are fundamentally joining a human organization. And so 5 years from now, it'll be some sort of cyborg, right? Where it's part computer, but also still fundamentally very, very human. I know for sure, although I might be old school, I wouldn't want to join an organization where I didn't get to meet as many of the teams that I'll be working with until the very last stages. Like I want to get to know them as much as possible. But it's 1 or 2 rounds is not going to be good enough for me. And I certainly would encourage other folks, if they're on the job hunt, to also dig deep into their organizations, get beyond the technology, get beyond what your day-to-day is, and really understand who it is you're going to be working with. How do they think? How do they process? How do they welcome you? How do they make decisions? And all of that is a story better told from another human on the other side.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to one of the great lies of recruiting. And I think there are a few, right? So a couple of the other ones are, I, as the potential employee, lie to you, the potential employer, and say, I want to work for your company forever until I pass away and or retire or whatever it is, right? And you as the employer say, I want you to work for me regardless, and the job's always going to exist, and you'll have a great career with us, etc., etc. Both of those are really big lies. The other lie that we tell ourselves is that we're recruiting someone the whole transaction is to recruit someone to do a job. But I think that's a lie. I think we're recruiting a colleague, a friend, a confidant, a team member. And actually, if you're looking to join a new social circle, which is what a job is, you think that's where you spend a lot of your socializing time, that personal element is huge. And I think that's why I agree so strongly with you that that the human element will never go.
And certainly now more than ever, right? People are finding so much more fulfillment at work that extends beyond the paycheck, that extends beyond the work, that you need to test for that as a candidate and as an employer.
Absolutely. Well, Angela, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Felix. Yeah, it was such an easy and organic conversation. Thank you.